intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process.
What a beautiful announcement. Another pandemic tyrant has fallen. Oh, yes, you love to see it. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just announced earlier today that he is resigning, stepping down as the Liberal Party leader. Trudeau's leadership started off very promising. He had about a 60% approval rating, and then it quickly collapsed after people realized that he's just a communist and nothing more. It's been quite the ride to sit back and watch. Canadians have been embarrassed, and rightfully so. We in the United States have been as well with our so-called leader. But they've been fed up with hearing things like this.
Now, it shouldn't be that way. It wasn't supposed to be that way. We were supposed to be on a steady, if difficult sometimes, march towards progress. And yet, just a few weeks ago, the United States voted for a second time to not elect its first woman president. Everywhere, women's rights and women's progress is under attack, overtly and subtly. But I want you to know that I am, and always will be, a proud feminist. You will always have an ally in me and in my government.
Well, listen here, folks. I'm very proud that the United States of America rejected 2 female candidates for president because, well, they weren't qualified to be president of the United States. Just like you, Trudeau, you're not qualified to be the prime minister because you're an embarrassment. You're a joke. In fact, you're such a joke that you took an emergency flight to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring of President Trump after you made those embarrassing communist comments. And, well, I gotta say, President Trump knew exactly who you were when you stepped through the front door, and he dragged you like the little man that you are. Instead, he sat there and told you that if Canada can't survive 25% tariffs, then Canada could just become a state in the United States, and you could just become governor. And just like that, it was over for Trudeau. Canadians have been reminding Justin Trudeau that he is, in fact, a weak little man all along the road. Take a listen.
King Trudeau, what gives you the right to continue? What gives you the right to stay in office? You failed Canada. You've ruined our country. You're done. Walk away. You don't have an ounce of your father's integrity. At least he walked in the snow. You've ruined this country. Everyone around you is running from you. They're abandoning you. Chrystia Freeland, Sean Fraser, they've all left you. It's time for you to go. It's time for Canada to have an election. You're not the king.
What about the 40% taxes I'm paying, and I don't have a doctor?
The $400 million in invested in the card means you're going to have a job for
I think you're only here for another year.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Please get the out of BC.
Have a wonderful day, man.
Yeah, you suck.
It's beautiful, beautiful. Music to my ears. The people have spoken. They're done with the globalist agenda. They're done with all of these Marxists. You have all failed, whether it's America, Canada, or Europe. We're all fighting back. Your days are numbered. Freedom always wins, and you're about to get that message and learn it the hard way. And we look forward to all of you learning the hard way. Coming up, there's a lot of noise coming from our friends across the pond, and it has to deal with Elon Musk, Pakistanis, and children who have been sexually abused. I'll bring you the details next. After stirring up a wave of confusion following the New Orleans terrorist attack, the FBI seems to be giving the illusion that they're transparent with the American people all of a sudden. The agency telling the American people over the weekend that the terrorist attack that did murder, sadly, 14 people on New Year's Day, well, the terrorist himself visited Egypt and Canada back in 2023. He also apparently wore meta glasses. He did so just weeks prior to the attack, as well as during the attack. But during the attack, apparently, according to the FBI, he did not film the attack. For some reason, our federal government didn't prevent this horrific attack from taking place, and that has many people on edge, and we're all wondering why. Well, I have an idea. maybe the White House was too busy creating the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter Islamophobia and anti-Arab hate. No, seriously, folks, that's still on the White House's website right now. This took place just less than 2 weeks before the terrorist attack. The White House decided to dedicate its resources to push this out. And well, one can only wonder, why were they prioritizing just that? But we're also noticing that globally, and so it's not really a surprise that they're trying to focus on those who aren't really happy with Arabs coming into their countries. And so it's quite interesting to see play out. Joining me to discuss, Jim Hanson. He's the president of World Strat Solutions. Jim, I'm excited to have you on today because there's a lot to dive into in regards to this terrorist who committed a horrific act in New Orleans. The FBI, they're kind of pretending to be a little transparent, but I think they're stirring up more controversy and confusion. If you had to just kind of sit back and grade and assess what they've done up to this point in regard to telling the American people what actually took place that day, what would you give them?
Exactly what they gave the American people, nothing of substance. They have spent their time trying to gloss over this. They initially, the first chance they had to speak to the American people about this, they bold-faced lied to us and said it wasn't a terrorist attack while they had in their hands an ISIS Shahada flag. So I don't think they've done anything except try to cover this up. And the investigation, to the extent they're conducting it, does not seem to be in the interest of finding whether this guy was connected to other organizations. It seems to be in covering up any connections to other organizations.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's deeply concerning. I know the White House was focused on fighting back against Arab hate and Islamophobia. And that could also, I think, be a reason why they weren't trying to be transparent originally when they did their first press conference and one of their own came out and said that this doesn't have any ties or they don't think it has anything to do with a terrorist event. Knowing, like you just said, there was an ISIS flag in this individual's car. So it's pretty concerning, I'd say, that they are hiding that from the American people. Then a couple of minutes later had to issue a statement on Twitter kind of debunking what their own agent told us. But it's not really surprising. I think they're masters at creating confusion. But I want to talk to you about something that I found to be interesting. Yesterday, the FBI telling us that the terrorist traveled to Egypt back in 2023. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the region, I want to take a look at the map because it's very close to Libya. And this had me deeply concerned when I heard this because he spent, a couple of weeks in Egypt. We don't know if he ever crossed the border or if he just stayed in Egypt. What about this region, Jim, do you think might potentially signal that he could have possibly received some training while he was spending some time in Egypt?
Well, Egypt was the headquarters for the Muslim Brotherhood, the umbrella organization for all of the worst Islamist groups worldwide. Now, they actually got shut down there. I'm not sure they ever left, but their headquarters was shut down and burned. But going there, he was not there to see the pyramids. He was there for other reasons. And I think it's deeply concerning when you've got someone who is obviously espousing, this violent cause. And again, as you mentioned, this report that the Biden administration put out, they're trying to downplay the very danger that this guy brought, whether it was from overseas or whether it was from his own initiative. But it's the same ideology. And I think the idea that we're pretending that is something we need to worry about, talking about that, at the same time they're telling us the most dangerous people in the world are white supremacists, they have their entire set of priorities upside down.
Yeah, they do, Jim. And that's part that gets me so annoyed because I've repeatedly asked both DHS and the FBI for the statistics regarding what you just cited. They continue to say that domestic terrorism there's a threat increase and they continue to push that narrative, but they won't give you an actual statistic to prove it. They'll just tell you individual cases that they've deemed as those that are showing an increase. And there's no real factual argument behind it. And it goes unchecked by the media, unfortunately. But I wanted to mention something else that I've been trying to look into, and I'm not getting any answers from the FBI, of course. There was the footage that we saw floating around on Twitter of several journalists doing a tour of the terrorist home just 24 hours after the attack, it seemed like. And they somehow were able to gain access into his home in Houston and do a walk around. And they show you a Quran, some Islamic material, a Bible as well, what appears to be a laptop, what appears to be both the warrant possibly and a receipt for the items that were pulled from the house when the FBI was present. So I reached out to the FBI. I wanted some answers on all of this. I asked them specifically, why were they able to clear it within 24 hours? I mean, I've never heard of this ever in my life. And I also asked them why they didn't take critical pieces of information with them, evidence, or any of this. The FBI telling me that they cleared the house on Thursday, released it back to the property owner. And then I asked around, and it turns out that the FBI actually might have went back to the house after we asked them about those critical pieces of evidence that they left behind, and they might have actually recovered it. Now, again, the FBI is not telling me whether or not they did go back into that house. I could just confirm with local news reporters that the local Harris County deputies were outside, and then the sheriff, I asked him, and this is very wordy, but the sheriff told me that the FBI is the one handling the case, and he has no comment on it. So that tells me the FBI went back in to get more evidence. What concerns you about a Quran being left behind originally by the FBI, Islamic material being left behind as well, and possibly a laptop left on the desk, and the FBI just doesn't want any part in it?
I'm not going to lie. When I saw that footage, I thought it was fake.
Yeah.
I could not believe in that time frame that any competent law enforcement organization would go ahead and allow a crime scene to be compromised and contaminated. Now, if they went through and looked at stuff, left any of that behind, that's one fail. Allowing journalists and other people inside, another massive fail. Now, if they go back and they take evidence out of there after they allowed it to be compromised, any of that evidence is contaminated. How do we know that when the cameras were off, that journalist didn't plant something interesting there to make a better story? We don't know. And that's not how competent law enforcement organizations work. And our national security cannot be entrusted to people who are that incompetent. I tell you right now, the broom that Kash Patel is going to use to empty out the FBI cannot be big enough.
Yeah, it can't be at this point. I mean, even just trying to communicate with their people who are in charge of being able to communicate with the media, it's painful because they don't want to give you direct answers. They're dancing around all of this, and it's not what a transparent organization would actually want to achieve. Speaking of transparency, I've got to ask, because that same day, that horrific day when the terrorist attack took place, we also witnessed an explosion outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. Matt Livesberg is the individual who apparently, according to reports, did take his own life in that explosion. According to the FBI and local PD, he apparently took his own life first, shot himself in the head, and then the explosion did happen. Now, it's really hard to cipher through all of this because, again, the American people don't trust law enforcement, and rightfully so at this point, because they've done so much to lie to us in the past. But we're now seeing images of an email, according to the Sean Ryan show, make its way around. And in the email, it just shows that this individual, Matt, the veteran, he might have been dealing with PTSD, that he's talking about drones, the drones that we saw in New Jersey, and how this might be an issue with China. He also says that he was potentially being followed as well. So when Americans are trying to look at all of this and trying to figure out, is this just somebody struggling with mental health issues, or is this somebody who might have actually been followed by the government and might have been targeted? How should we handle all of this?
With the same skepticism that we have to show everything now, because as you mentioned, we cannot trust anything we're told by the people who we entrust with our safety. So I think in the end, the simplest answer to this is that a guy whose wife left him, had a new baby, he had a bunch of personal problems, and if that email is legitimate, was paranoid and delusional, took his life in front of the Trump Hotel, and according to what the police found there, was trying to create a stunt to wake up the American people. So the simplest answer is that's what happened. It's complicated, and some of the surveillance video makes it difficult to see the exact sequence of events. I think he could have detonated the fireworks and the cooking fuel and stuff by releasing fumes into the cab of the vehicle and then clacking off that Desert Eagle, which is a giant muzzle flash producing weapon, and that could have caused the whole explosion. But we don't know. And until they give us some specific information, we're going to have to continue to mistrust what we're being told.
Yeah, and that's the problem with all of this is we can't trust it. I wanted to ask you before you go, in regards to again the Sean Ryan show. We saw an incredible interview that he did with former CIA targeting officer Sarah Adams, and in it she details how there's Islamic terrorists all around the world who are looking to plot an attack here on U.S. soil and around at our embassies as well. I've spoken with people like Sonia Labasco, who works with the air marshals, and she's been upset because, and rightfully so, they are capable of making these undetectable vests that do explode. And for our audience at home, it makes it very, very uneasy to be traveling during times like this. Now that we know, according to Sonia Labasco, that they're not really coordinating any efforts between TSA and the air marshals about these devices. She's made several attempts to reach out. How do we handle this, knowing that, number one, Joe Biden's left us completely vulnerable over these last 4 years? And number two, I mean, how do we travel knowing that this is possibly being missed by our own TSA agents?
I think we hold our breath for the next 2 weeks. Fortunately, Donald Trump's election was certified. He's bringing in with him a wartime cabinet. His first term, the cabinet and the people working for him, I would classify as a peacetime cabinet. Nobody's going in with the slightest illusions this time. Everybody has been told the status quo is not just broken, it's counterproductive and dangerous. So empty out the dead weight, get rid of the policies that are making us less safe, and bring in ones regardless of the screaming and wailing and gnashing of teeth anybody does that the American people want. We want our borders closed, we want our enemies scared, and we want the entire homeland of our country secured. And I think we're going to see a lot of that coming in the very short term.
Yep. Well, we need that. We need that right now more than anything. Jim, as always, thank you for your time. We greatly appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Big news happening all around the world, but specifically our friends up north. I'll bring you the very latest. Politics in the UK have been kind of crazy these last few days. If you've been looking on X, Elon Musk is getting involved. He's been a critic of how the UK government has handled the crisis that's on its hand regarding children being raped. Now, this has been going on for years. All of a sudden now, people are starting to pay attention to this. The government in the UK has been distancing itself and trying to ignore what's going on in their own country. Islamic migrants, we'll just call them for now, have been sexually assaulting children for years. And their own government has completely ignored the issue and helped cover it up. And those who are critical of any of this are thrown in jail regarding whether you show up to a protest, you post something on Facebook. They throw you in prison in the UK. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has really been feeling the heat since Elon Musk stepped in, and he had to address his critics publicly earlier today. So let's take a listen.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics.
Listen, we're talking about children who've been sexually assaulted, okay, by people who should not be in your country in the first place. It's not far right just because you don't want children to be sexually assaulted by these animals. You've let them into your country, you let them destroy your country. Now you're afraid to speak up because, well, you're afraid that, number one, you're going to lose your election, and number two, they are violent. We're not talking about people who are peaceful. They know that. That's why in the past, you've seen probably all these BBC reports when they're reporting on protests, and they quickly cut the feed when one of these non-British individuals comes behind them with a weapon. It's happened repeatedly. Folks, this issue has gone unspoken about for years in the UK, and it's finally starting to catch the attention of some very important people, and rightfully so. You're not far right for saying you don't want children to be raped. That's not far right. Joining me now to discuss is Father Calvin Robinson. Father, I want to say thank you for joining me. I I'm so thrilled for sexual assault victims in the UK right now because they're finally getting some attention. People like Sammy Woodhouse, who's been fighting for this her whole life after she was raped at the age of 14, are now getting some national coverage. And so I'm very happy for all of this. But explain to our audience why all of a sudden is Elon Musk getting involved and what does this mean for those in the UK?
Yeah, first of foremost, I must say thank God for Elon Musk. I don't share his politics, I don't share his worldview, but I do appreciate that he at least agrees with me on certain issues, and free speech is one of them. Without him and without X, we would not be having this conversation. Our politicians in the United Kingdom across the bench, so from the left-wing Labour Party to the so-called centre-right Conservative Party, have brushed this issue under the carpet for so long, and now it's finally getting the time of day. And this is the most important issue. This is about the protection of the most vulnerable in society. And for the clip you just played right there of our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, for him to stand there today and say, anyone who's addressing this issue is on the far right, is jumping on a far right bandwagon. That is the most evil thing I've heard in a long time, because first and foremost, it's disingenuous, as if any of his contemporaries would be wanting to jump on a far-right bandwagon. We don't have a single politician in Parliament who is far-right. I would argue there aren't even any far-right people in the United Kingdom, but there is not a single politician that's been elected on a far-right platform. We have the Green Party, Conservatives, Liberal Democrats, Labour. We've even got some Islamists who've been invited into the Houses of Parliament, which is astonishing to me and shouldn't even be happening in our country. But beside the matter, there's not a single person who would say, let's jump on a far-right bandwagon. So for him to say that, he's dismissing what is the most important topic of protecting vulnerable young girls. And what we've seen in the UK is time and time again, whenever this issue gets raised, it gets pushed away, swept under the carpet, either deflected or ignored. And this time it won't happen. Thanks to Elon Musk, thanks to X, thanks to people like you who are sharing this from abroad, but the conversation will be finally had. And the voices, you're quite right to point out Sammy Woodhouse. There are a number of others. Sammy Smith's another one. There are a number of survivors who I'm friends with. I know people who have been victims and survived these Pakistani Muslim rape gangs, and their story hasn't been told. The police have helped cover it up. The counsellors have helped cover it up. The therapists, the MPs, and the ministers. Every single part of the establishment has either deflected or covered up. So our whole country is pretty much complicit at this point. But thank God once more that we are finally having the conversation. Let's get some justice for these poor girls.
Father Calvin Robinson, as always, I got to thank you for joining me. It's always a great discussion when you're on board. So thank you.
God bless you. Happy New Year.
You as well. Thank you. We will be right back with a clip you're not going to want to miss in just a few moments. It is time to lighten the mood, and we've got the great soundbite for you to take a listen to.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. All right.
Oh, man. It's not as bad as Kamala Harris, who forgot the Pledge of Allegiance last week. That was pretty rough. It's been a great time filling in for Jesse. He'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.
I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.